Let's call the meeting to order. Cassandra, you want to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Superintendent Choudhury is absent. Clarence Felder as designee for Secretary Churchill.
You're muted.
Good morning, present.
Miss Eberhardt is here. Mr. Gibbons.
Here.
Miss Lala.
Here.
Mr. Lombardo.
Present.
Secretary McCord.
Present.
And Chair Casemeyer.
Here. Thank you.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any revisions to the agenda, Bob?
Yes, Mr. Chair, item 1D, there's a request to pull it separately. So I think Secretary McCord will have more information when we get down to that on the consent agenda.
Okay. Any public comment, Cassandra?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Bob, you want to go through the consent agenda, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we have items for decision on A through D, and then 3 items, E through G, that are informational. And as I said, I believe that Secretary McCord has requested that 1D be held separately. So if you would like, we could take a motion for the consent agenda excluding 1D.
Okay.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Any questions on items A through C from anybody? Do I hear a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chair. Gloria Lawler.
Second? Okay, all
Second.
in favor of consent agenda items A through C, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Item D, Secretary McCord.
Yes, we'd like to pull this because we need to have some more time for clarification on the priority funding area status of all of the property involved in this transaction. And my staff is working on that. They brought it to my attention, and like to have that cleanly understood before we present it to the board.
Okay. Why don't we just delay that until you're ready?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Bob, do you want to continue with the, who's going to do the other items?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, item 2 is a revision of the FY21 health.
Come back at the Allegheny.
Oh, for the informational items on Allegheny?
Yeah, anything there? We need
Yeah,
to know.
Mr. Chair, there's nothing that I would want to highlight as far as the information, but be happy to go through it if you'd like.
Any questions on items E through G? Linda Eberhardt.
Yes. The Allegheny County, it puts pre-K in the Judy program into a middle school building. And it's not that I oppose it, but I just wondered their decision-making in that thought of what was why did they decide? In Baltimore, we've had a pre-K program and a high school, and it was because there wasn't enough space in the northeast part of Baltimore City, and that the high school students had a pathway to become educational assistants. Normally, pre-K programs are in the same school with the kindergarten so the children can get used to it. Do you know the thinking of why a middle school building that they were putting just the pre-K program and the Judy Center program?
I'd like to defer this to Fred and if he could help me out. Is Fred on?
See Fred.
He's muted. I don't see him. Cassandra, do you? Oh, here's Fred. Yeah.
I'm on, and we would have to go back to Allegheny County for me to get more understanding of their process. I'm not sure if Brett Waskowitz, who's also on the call, was involved in that discussion with Allegheny County.
Okay.
I believe it's primarily to more effectively use the space in this building.
But they were asking for, I believe, an addition to the building.
No, I don't think so. Brett?
To be honest, I'm not sure. This.
Yeah, why don't we just
have to go back to Allegheny?
why don't we hold it to the next meeting?
Thank you. Yeah, Allegheny has a very low utilization. They have a lot of empty space, and I believe this is just a reconfiguration.
Okay.
But we will get more information and bring back to you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I don't want to slow anything up. for the county because it's important. So, just information for.
Mr. Chair, if it's information, if it's all right, we could send that information out to all the members for their consideration. And if anybody wants then to bring it back and add it as an agenda item next month, we could.
I mean, once you find out the answer.
Yes, because this is informational. It really doesn't require any approval. That's
Okay, why don't you do that? That's a good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Items
Mr.
F and G. Any questions by anybody for F and G? Okay. Item number 2, revision of FY 2021 Healthy School Facility Fund, Arabia.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
The IAC are recommending modifications to the FY21 allocation schedule for the Healthy School Facility Fund in anticipation that it will minimize the impact of labor shortages on educational agencies that have experienced delays due to production and delivery of materials and supplies needed for project completion. The present schedule requires that FY21 funds be encumbered by June of this year, and that funds are substantially expended by October. The table included in the motion provides the proposed changes and follows the FY22 Healthy Schools Facility Fund schedule by extending the deadline 1 year to encumber, expend, and request reimbursement. The proposed changes are permissible based on communication with the Department of Budget and Management and will not negatively impact the bond requirements for the program year. I'm available for questions, or I can read the motion.
Any questions on this item? Raby, you want to restate the motion?
Yes. To modify the Healthy School Facility Fund Administrative Procedures Guide, Attachment 1, Schedule for Application and Approval of Project Funding for FY21 Healthy Schools Facility Funds to align with the schedule of FY22 funding.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second? Okay, Mr. McCord, Secretary McCord. Okay, any more discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Mr. Chair, if I could make a note that Secretary Chowdhury had joined the meeting and voted on that last motion.
oh, thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Good to see you here. Item number 3, 10-year average freeze. Alex?
Morning,
Morning.
Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. This item is about the predictability of CIP allocations and LEA's resulting abilities to plan projects as part of portfolio management and to best align available local and state resources. For the last few years, the IAC has given each LEA advance notice of their estimated CIP allocation level for the coming cycle based upon the average of the previous 10 years of allocations for that LEA. IAC staff provided this estimated number upfront so that the LEA could better plan and prioritize its project requests. The number does not serve as any guarantee of the eventual allocation level because an LEA might not end up having enough eligible projects to use the entire amount, or a critical need in another county may need to be provided a small portion of additional funding in order to keep the project moving. Nevertheless, the 10-year average target served to describe the total allocation level that the LEA is likely to be able to tap if it were to have sufficient eligible projects and the statewide needs permit that level of funding. The 10-year average was not intended to be a permanent tool, but rather a temporary mechanism to support better planning, while the IAC considers other potential methods of determining LEA level allocations. Last year, you directed IAC staff to explore options for determining LEA level allocations on an annual basis, and staff are developing information to present at an upcoming IAC meeting. In the meantime, however, IAC staff have heard concerns from LEAs that variability in the total statewide CIP amounts from year to year, as well as variability in the actual allocations to a given LEA from year to year, could result in an LEA's annual allocation declining in FY 2023 and future years. In addition, the fact that an LEA may now request project funding through the CIP or the new Build to Learn Act program, or both, means that there are concerns from LEAs that placing projects into the Built to Learn pipeline could result in decreased CIP funding over a term of years. These concerns are valid, of course, because a decrease in an LEA CIP allocation in any given year would result in a reduction in future 10-year averages for that LEA. To allay these concerns while retaining the planning benefits of the 10-year average, IAC staff recommend that the IAC adjust the temporary mechanism by freezing the 10-year average based upon the average from fiscal 2013 to fiscal 22 for the CIP cycles in fiscal 23, 24, and 25, while we work with LEAs and other stakeholders to determine a more appropriate and consistent way to target available funding. This solution will promote further good planning practices by allowing LEAs to utilize whichever funding source makes the most sense for a project, rather than submitting projects through the CIP that might better be funded with Built to Learn Act funds, for example, just in order to keep the 10-year average up. I'm happy to stand for any questions and read the motion.
Thank you, Alex. That's very interesting. I think we sent out something last month, right, Bob, trying to describe this action.
We did ahead of time, yes, that we would be bringing this action to the commission.
Are there any questions on what we're doing here? Secretary McCord, you're on mute.
It's not really a question. It's a comment to say that I appreciate the effort that the IAC is making to try to appreciate the different formulas that we are operating under, and making sure that the school systems understand that the funding sources are different and have slightly different requirements. And this is something that we got to stay focused on to make sure that they can plan well. The Department of Planning wants them to plan well also. And I want to be able to make sure that we're on track to move away from a simple 10-year average as soon as we can. And I'm glad to hear that we're doing that. And whatever it takes to get us to a point where that we're away from that 10-year averages means that we're not doing it the same way we've always done it. And because the legislature surely hasn't done it the same way, we've got new sophisticated formulas, and we need to understand how they're working and how they interact. And I appreciate that effort that Alex and his crew are doing to make sure that we're trying to give the best predictive sense to the LEAs of what they can expect. So I just want to say that it's a monumental job. I appreciate the work they're doing, and I appreciate one day moving away from simply looking at what we've done for the past 10 years. So I appreciate us headed in the right direction on this. And I just want to say thanks for the work the IAC is doing on that.
Thank you. Ms. Everhart.
Yes. Bob, was the reaction of the locals that had questions about the original plan? Does this help satisfy their needs?
We believe so. It's a year-to-year strategy of them trying to figure out how they can get the most money to come into their county. And sometimes they put aside planning in order to get the dollars. And we saw this on the status report last month, in that there's a lot of dollars that aren't being expended. That doesn't help the children. So that's our concern. And I think it's the LEA's concern also. I have not heard, since we sent out the notice that we would be considering to do this, to freeze the 10-year, of any concerns from any of the LEAs. And in fact, I think I have a nod. And I'd like to ask Brett Waskowitz specifically, because he meets monthly with each of the LEAs to try to understand how to better line their projects up with available funding. What have you heard back on this?
I've heard nothing back from the LEAs regarding, anything negative back from the LEAs regarding the freeze of the 10-year average. With all the different funding sources between Healthy Schools and now Built to Learn Act and CIP and EGRC, they're looking for something, a little more matter of fact that they can financially plan. So I think the 10-year average, I've only heard a handful of comments from LEAs, and all of them have been favorable.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, Gloria Lawler. I'm
Yes,
trying
ma'am.
to find Prince George's County on here, since I do live over here. Am I looking at the right chart? What page? Are we on page 27, 28?
We're on page 26 of the 10-year freeze,
Okay, 26.
and there are no counties specifically named
I'm
with
looking
this.
at
This
the
is
charts, but I'm looking at these charts on 27 and 28 following.
we're going to be coming to
something later.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah, next
Okay.
next
and
item.
I didn't see Prince George's on either one of those charts. That's what I meant.
Okay, we'll get to that next.
All right. Okay. I'm back up on 26.
Okay.
Got you.
Any other questions about this proposal? Want to repeat the motion, Alex?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Thank you. The motion is to hold the IAC's LEA CIP funding targets for fiscal years 23, 24, and 25 at the amount provided to LEAs in fiscal 23 based upon the proportional 10-year average from fiscal 2013 to fiscal 22, and other appropriate factors that will hold harmless impacts to the target funding from other funding sources and allow the IAC, LEAs, and stakeholders time to develop an appropriate methodology to develop annual funding targets.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion.
Second? Mr. Lombardo. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All
Aye.
opposed? Okay. Thank you, Alex.
Certainly. Thank you.
Interesting proposal. Thanks for all your hard work. Okay, number 4, Built to Learn Act Project Status Report. Brett?
Mr. Chair, if I could, before Brett comes into this, to lay this all out so well, you'll see. Senator Lala, Prince George's, the reason that you won't see them on this or any of our future status reports, at least until we figure out how that we can report it, had a separate carve out earmark for P3. So their projects are being managed with a separate cash flow. And
I know about the P. Okay.
okay, very good. And I'm on those advisory committees, and I will report back out.
Thanks, Bob.
Brett.
Okay, Brett.
Sure. Good morning, Chair Casemeyer and members of the
Morning.
commission. Today, I am presenting a newly developed project status report for the approved Built to Learn Act projects. This report shows the project's delivery method, the percentage complete from each of the 3 phases, and any project-specific notes. For your use, there is a key provided that explains in detail each of the delivery methods. The percentage within each box indicates the level of project progress of that phase, and the color indicates to the degree which the activities of that phase are or were on schedule based upon the LEA's initially submitted project schedule. It should be noted at this stage of the project reporting that the schedule used was the schedule that the LEA submitted with their schematic design submission, or alternately the schedule from the design development submission, which is a later submission. Blue indicates the project was either completed or is on track to be completed ahead of schedule. Green indicates that the project was either completed or is on track to be completed within 2 months of the scheduled date. Yellow indicates that the phase was either completed or is on track to be completed between 2 and 4 months of the scheduled date. Red indicates that the phase was either completed or is on track to be completed more than 4 months after the scheduled date. As you know, lots of things can transpire along a construction project's timeline that might cause some sort of delay. Sometimes the LEA is able to make up the lost time and get the project back on schedule. This was most obvious with Anne Arundel County's projects when they missed a specific design submission target by a month. Then the duration of the next design submission was almost always shortened by a month in order to make up that time. I'd like to further explain some of the projects that are in red. In Baltimore County, Bedford Elementary replacement, New Northeast Area Middle School, and Pine Grove Middle School renovation addition projects were all included in Baltimore County's CIP submission for fiscal years 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. It wasn't until the Built to Learn Act that Baltimore County was able to receive the state share of these projects. Due to multiple consecutive CIP submissions without local planning approval or funding approval from the state for these projects, Baltimore County understandably slowed down the design of these projects. As a result, these projects are currently showing as behind schedule, but they are not behind schedule when compared to an approved fiscal 23 CIP project schedule. Carroll County's Westminster East Middle Replacement Project was slated to break ground in July, but due mainly to permitting issues, did not break ground until recently in December. All of Charles County's approved Built to Learn Act projects were designed as scheduled. Charles County was holding off on bidding out these projects until the MOU with MSA was fully executed. A few months ago, IAC staff recommended to issue the bid documents, and if the LEA still has concerns, then they can delay the bid date. All of these projects have state approval to receive bid. Charles County recently advised IAC staff that it is their intention to issue the bid documents for these projects soon. The Woodward High School replacement project in Montgomery County went through a redesign after the initial bid results were higher than anticipated, most likely due to the pandemic. MCPS diligently worked through the redesign process, but the project fell behind the initial schedule with the additional redesign efforts. The site work package, however, was bid, awarded, and has been progressing as scheduled. The IAC Field Operations Division will eventually, through its regional facilities managers, produce a status report like this one, all inclusive of state-funded projects. Excuse me. This, along with the project pipeline tracker, will provide an overview of school construction projects for a holistic portfolio management. In the future, when permissible delays occur, such as budgetary redesign efforts or lack of state funding approval, the schedules will be updated so that the project would not appear as red. We welcome any suggested revisions to this report that IAC members feel would enhance its value as we continue attempts to develop tools for all project stakeholders to use. This is an informational report and no action is required. I am happy to stand now for questions.
Good job. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks.
Any questions on Brett's comments? Everybody okay? Good. Nice job, Brett. Item 5, update on the work group on the assessment and funding of school facilities. Bob and his staff for the last several months have been attending monthly meetings with the legislative committee, and it was a struggle and a lot of detail, a lot of hard work on the part of our staff. Bob's going to report on the outcome of those meetings.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just lost my screen. If you could just give me a second here, so I'll see if I can recover.
We see you.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, the work group on the assessment and funding school facilities began meeting this summer. Its primary charge was to determine how the assessment results should be prioritized or weighted to best identify Maryland's highest need schools, or said another way, to identify those schools furthest from being educationally sufficient to support their intended educational programs. It's the only purpose of a school facility is to support what's going on inside of it. The work group also was required to make recommendations regarding how the results of the assessment should be used to make school construction funding decisions, if at all. Next slide, please. Additionally, the work group was tasked with looking at the state and local cost share formula and how to update the formula in alignment with changes to the education funding formula in accordance with the blueprint for Maryland's future developed by the Kirwan Commission. For reviewing and making recommendations around the IAC's gross area baselines, and to make recommendations regarding the use of and implementation of the local share revolving loan fund included but not funded in the 21st Century School Facilities Act, otherwise known as HB 1783. Next slide. Finally, the work group was tasked with looking at a number of potential incentives, including incentives around the total cost of ownership that we often refer to as TCO, which focuses on fiscal sustainability of school facilities and not just the first costs to construct. Next slide, please. As a reminder, the 21st Century School Facilities Act of 2018 required the state to contract with a third-party vendor to assess the facility condition and educational sufficiency of all approximately 1,400 school facilities in Maryland. Subsequently, the bill required the IAC to conduct ongoing assessments so that this data from our baseline state facilities assessment is never more than 4 years old. In other words, it's current and usable at any time. Next slide. As required by the IFP, the RFP that the IAC issued, the outcome of the statewide facilities assessment will be based upon 2 different scores, and they're both usable independently. The first is the Facility Condition Index. This represents only the bricks and mortar condition of the facility. It's not to score its suitability for education. I always like to make the example that you can have a brand new bowling alley, but it's not going to be appropriate for 3 or 4 classrooms. They're 2 different things. Of course, we have to believe that the schools that we have, existing schools that we have in place, were originally designed and purposed to support the educational program. So the educational sufficiency portion is important, and we'll explain why that is later. But the FCI is important for planning. Then the educational sufficiency component, which we've been calling the Maryland Condition Index, you'll see that's the hat up in the slide. That's the second part, is based upon the educational sufficiency standards that the IAC adopted in 2018, and as required by the 21st Century School Facilities Act. It is the very minimum of items within a school facility, like your air working between a temperature range of 68 and 75, that it's healthy and dry, and classroom size. Because you've got to have a certain classroom size and types of spaces within a school in order to support the educational programs. And that's what the sufficiency standards define. They were very minimum, but we use those in order to measure against existing. And if you have a school, for instance, that has had a lot of students go in a high growth area, it may have deficiencies in space. The assessment was designed to allow the Maryland Condition Index, the MDCI, to be adjustable. That's the third item. It's a combined score. We use physical condition with educational sufficiency deficiencies and come up with a combined score. And the assessment was designed for this scoring system to be adjustable to meet the Act's requirement to customize how the assessment results should be prioritized for funding. Through the use of these variances is how we've done it, of the weighting of sufficiency categories. The assessment is currently ready to support running what-if scenarios to maximize its use to prioritize all school-based considerations and upon their deviation from educational sufficiency as well, with the physical condition being added in. Additionally, I need to say that the FCI data set is also available independently now to support systemic or capital maintenance decision and overall portfolio planning. To understand on a comparable basis which of the roofs within an LEA are in the worst physical condition is a good factor. It may not be the driving factor on a decision, but it's good to know from an independent review and comparing apples to apples. Statewide facility assessments data updates. Next slide, please. The SFA began after several unfortunate procurement delays. In November of 2020, with an on-site assessments starting in December. All school facilities were assessed by on-site assessors employed by the state facilities assessment vendor before June of 2021. Once we had the data in the system, we began to create data sets for use and analysis. LEAs were provided the draft data and given a minimum of several weeks, in some cases several months, to review the data and provide feedback to the vendor so that corrections could be made. Once the data set was complete, we provided working drafts of the preliminary draft data to DLS for their review. Next slide, please. Unlike other assessments conducted all around the state, this assessment can allow stakeholders in the state to compare school facilities against a common standard. In other words, comparing apples to apples, and specifically the education facility standards that were adopted by the IAC in May of 2018. To do this, instead of assessing the cost to repair like some other assessments, the statewide facilities assessment observed and recorded the remaining useful life of every major building system to create a deficiency score, a physical deficiency score. The purpose of the assessment was not to identify solutions, either on the educational sufficiency side or on the physical deficiency side of a roof having no remaining life, for example, but instead to identify problems so that appropriate solutions can be appropriately prioritized, carefully planned, and then efficiently executed. Next slide. This slide shows the remaining useful life of a system result with FCI and how the FCI of each system gets rolled up into an overall FCI. Each essential building system, I used roof as an example previously, was assessed and each received an FCI score that rolls up to an FCI score for the entire facility. And that would be based upon their relative proportion of the replacement cost of each of those components compared to the whole, each of them in the building. Structure is one of the highest, for instance. Roof has a lesser cost. So if you've got a structure that's deficient, it's going to weight heavier against the FCI just because there's more of it than, say, a roof or interior finishes. As an example, a 20-year built-up roof with an FCI score of 75%, and lower is better, means that it is 75% depleted and has an expected remaining life of 5 years. Each of the building system's life, when it is no longer reasonably, let me back up. I'm sorry. I need to describe what end of life means that we're measuring. When we say it has 5 years of remaining life, then it's to end of life. End of life of a building system is when there is it can no longer be reasonably maintained with routine maintenance. And emergent or emergency maintenance is required on a regular basis. In other words, it's no longer reliable to perform its intended function. Something has to be done. An FCI of 0, on the other hand, is brand new. But that doesn't mean it doesn't need routine preventive maintenance, which will ensure the expected lifespan is achieved. Next slide, please. This is a result of and a look of our statewide facility condition index, and we divided them by band so that you could kind of get a feel for how our facilities compare against each other. How many are in worse condition? How many are in better condition? The preliminary data assessment shows that the vast majority of facilities in Maryland have an FCI between 50 and 59%. From an operational perspective, when a building system FCI hits 60 to 65%, a reliability yellow flag should go up as degradation once you reach 65%, just like on anything you've ever owned, a car or a house, it accelerates. It essentially holds its own. It doesn't require a lot of repairs, routine maintenance work. Once you hit that 60-65%, it begins to accelerate. Parts wear out faster, and even sometimes parts are hard to find. And maintainability becomes more expensive, and it's more difficult to stay on top of the maintenance. Next slide, please. This slide on page 43 of your agenda provides some context on what the various FCI scores might feel like from the perspective of the occupants, both students and teachers. Typically, whenever someone is within a facility that has an FCI that is in the middle range here, you will see they feel comfortable with it. This slide, I can stand for questions as we go forward, but the bottom line is the lower the FCI, the better. Next slide, please. This slide shows the average FCI throughout the entire state, and you'll see that the bright red line has an FCI of 47%, and that's the state average. There are some LEAs with their averages, their portfolio averages that are in better condition, that's the lower FCI, and some that have lesser conditions. We talked about Allegheny and utilization earlier. You'll see that they actually have the overall worst condition, physical condition. And we talked about utilization, that their facilities are really underutilized. So they have a lot to take care of. Next slide, please. After meeting a number of times, this is the assessment, the work group, between June and December of 21, the work group on the assessment of funding and school facilities came up with a number of recommendations. First is delaying the priority fund until fiscal year 27 and extending the healthy school facility fund until that time. In other words, funds won't be allocated using the MDCI prioritization until, or at the earliest, fiscal year 27. The second is, yes.
Bob, do you want to sort of describe the, I won't say conflicts, but the differences between us and DLS that sort of led to delays in putting forth this plan?
Mr. Chair, I would say that DLS were really wanting to do their diligence on making sure that everything was working as we advertised. Had I known that whenever we were developing the RFP, and I didn't know it at that time, I would have put a lot more time into the schedule and as a responsibility for the vendor to be able to support, because we have, this assessment has over 500,000 data points. So when DLS asked to see how this works, it's a database. It's designed for a purpose where it gets to the results that we want. They wanted it in, we had to produce Excel spreadsheets with the data. And in reality, it turned into, they were so large that I think that at some point, and certainly Alex can weigh in on this because he was working directly with them, they couldn't really use them. So we kept dividing it up and going with pieces of this to get their comfort level. I think in the end, they were, but it burned a lot of time. Yeah. And we didn't have results that the work group could work through. We were ready at the beginning, honestly, to be able to vary the weightings to come up with a prioritized list, but DLS was not comfortable, because if we did that and it wasn't an accurate list, in other words, the data was wrong or formulas weren't working right, then it would have been a fool's game. And I respect that as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So the second point is that one of the recommendations is requiring that the IAC may not use the school facility assessment data to determine funding decisions until May of 2026. Another recommendation is a new work group beginning in 2024 will pick up and determine the appropriate MDCI categories and the relevancy weighting, and we have those models ready to go. And until that work is complete, the IAC cannot use the draft Maryland Condition Index. That's the composite score of need. Beginning in the next assessment refresh cycle, this is another recommendation, additional components like humidity, light, paint, emergency communications, health room attributes, and more are to be specifically verified. And we will do this by providing a list to the LEAs so that they can tell us specifically if they have any issues like that, and we can be targeted to go look at those items and determine their remaining useful life, or they may not even be there at all. This assessment was designed to look at existing facilities and their remaining useful life. In other words, how were they there or not, such as square footage. And if, of course, a school is there, so it would just be a lack of square footage, and that would be an efficiency, an educational sufficiency deficiency. Or on a roof, and the school has a roof, how much time is left on it. That's the way it was designed. It wasn't designed to to go and look at the latest standards that somebody may want. But for instance, one of the items on the list is emergency communications and safety. And as Mr. Lombardo and Ben also, and Brian also understand, the state fire marshal goes to all facilities, and particularly commercial facilities, and particularly schools, and looks at alarm systems and other safety systems so that they are operating. It's a regular thing, and because of that, we didn't focus on this in the statewide assessment, and because of the amount of time that was left in order to perform this, and we did this all for 4 cents a square foot, which is far, far less than it would have cost to have done a forensics engineering analysis of a facility, the way some of these things could be construed. So we're finding this middle ground. We expected the LEAs to tell us if something was missing. It's a new process. We understand they were overwhelmed. We did it pretty quickly. So we'll just go back with a little more diligence and give them prompts through lists so that we can flesh out the areas that the work group had some concerns, just to make sure that we have everything covered whenever we are reviewing the assessment. And that can happen at each refresh cycle. You don't even have to go out and physically visit the site on one of the once every 4 years, but we will begin I'm pretty short order to go our next refresh cycle, send these forms out to all of the LEAs. And even if we don't this year visit the school, we can still make those revisions if something needs to be updated within their database. Lastly, before I move on to the work group's other recommendations, I want to say that you can see from this high-level presentation that the data provided by the statewide facilities assessment will be invaluable for the work of the IAC. We have more detailed information, including a working model with variable weightings for MDCI prioritization that we'd be happy to present on or share with interested IAC members just to see how all this works. We even have built a separate spreadsheet with a school so that you have to really want to understand how that works. You have to break it down to a school level. I wish I'd have thought of this earlier with the DLS whenever they were wanting to see how this worked, to demonstrate how these parts fit against each other. But we have that now, and would be happy to demonstrate that and what it would look like if you change, for instance, the weighting of safety. What would it do to the way that the 1,400 schools look against each other? Next slide, please. The local share revolving fund is something that was in 1783, but it wasn't funded. The work group is making a number of recommendations, including renaming the fund and clarifying the use of the fund, allocating starter funds over the next 3 years. The recommendation is to require that priority be given for use of this funds to counties that have not forward funded projects and that have limited debt capacity, and also that loans be repaid with no interest within 5 years. That the loans can be used for either state or local share of projects through the Built to Learn program or the Capital Improvement program. Next slide. The work group also made recommendations related to the state and local cost share formula, including that the formula's components be updated to align with the blueprint bill, and also to add some project level components for concentration of poverty schools. And as Alex said earlier, we believe that we'll start that work with the IAC, and we have been working on that, and we'll bring forward some ideas for your consideration. Next slide, please. There were also discussed incentives by project, and the work group made project level incentive recommendations, including 5 additional percentage points. These are state share percentage points. If the most recent school maintenance effectiveness assessment, or MEA, is good or superior, or the same 5 points if the school's most recent MEA, maintenance effectiveness evaluation, is adequate and the average system percentage useful life is 100% or greater. In other words, of that school are things lasting longer than they should have on average for the whole school. And unfortunately, this threshold may be too low because we have so many older facilities within the state that they have had to keep those old systems together using wire and tape sometimes. And I don't mean that in a funny way. It's not just to keep things working. But we will look if this legislation comes out, we'll look very closely. And of course, now we have the assessment database, and we can make recommendations of what would be real to work as an assessment. Also, 5 additional percentage points if the total cost of ownership is at least 15% below the state average. This makes a lot of sense. And 5 percentage points if the school will be a net zero facility. And not surprisingly, those two, lowering the TCO and a net zero school, those two will work together. Next slide, please. Regarding projected enrollments, the work group is recommending that the IAC establish guidelines to limit applicability of excess capacity in adjacent schools. If that capacity is scattered in such a way that it is not practically useful, and that the IAC establish a specific appeal process for enrollment projections. Members, Mr. Chair, I believe we do that already, but I really like the idea of having a rubric that we publish so that we have thresholds that can start this process of looking deeper. Just based upon those thresholds, and we're working on that. We'll be bringing that back to you to consider. Related to gross area baselines, the work group recommends that the IAC align sufficiency standards and the gross area baselines with requirements of the blueprint bill, and to specifically consider square footages for English learners, community schools, collaborative spaces, breakout spaces, and CTE. IAC staff are looking at all of these recommendations. And for instance, on this last one, we'll probably have to hire some vendors and have them each design a hypothetical model school and possibly even have a competition of who can provide that school reasonably with gross square footage so that we have the perfect school built for the blueprint bill at the point where the blueprint bill can be fully funded with teachers and operation funds, et cetera. But we'll have those numbers to look at and make tweaks to our own gross area baselines accordingly as we move towards that level. I stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, there's a lot to take in.
Yes.
Any questions anybody has of Bob about the work group's work?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Yes, Senator.
Okay, so from the original, there was a lot of work done originally that you all set up, and then you're coming back with these new recommendations on top of that. What does that do to the original SFA?
On the gross area baselines, Senator?
Yes. Yeah.
The gross area baselines were done very methodically, and we included the LEAs as in hearing their ideas. We had a work group that took over a year, more than a year, as we put that together. And as you know, if somebody feels they cannot deliver education appropriately within those guidelines, they are able to appeal that. They are able to challenge us. And you've already approved a couple of increases in gross area baselines at a couple of schools because it was demonstrated. And now we have real information based on somebody that has tried to solve the problem, demonstrated architecturally that it can't be, and that increase needs to happen. We'll continue to do that. So I look at these requirements to move forward and look at the blueprint and what its needs are similarly. But I think it really is going to be on a case-by-case basis that you have to have the real problem in front of you. And just there are opportunities that you can't see unless you do it diligently. For instance, multi-use of spaces is something that is not done maybe as effectively as it could be. And we'll learn from each other, make these changes. So bottom line is, I think that all of our work that we have done will still be used. But just like education always has been, it will continue to evolve. And we want to evolve our guidelines so that they move with it, not just keep adding on spaces that we need in the future because of changes, but also look to see what we might not need any longer and try to keep our schools fiscally sustainable, which is the purpose of the gross area baseline.
Okay, my last question is, Mr. Chairman, does this resolve some of the criticism that we were getting as a commission?
I think we're working in that direction, yes. I mean, as
a lot of work has gone into this.
Yeah, as Bob said, there was so much information and compacted in terms of a short period of time to deal with it that we just didn't have enough time for each other to explore and understand the data, and sort of delayed the policies being put into effect as Bob has described. But I think that there was goodwill on both sides, and we both felt we were working toward a good result. We just didn't have enough time to get there this year.
Well, I appreciate Bob and all that they have done. I want to let him know that there's a lot of work that went into this.
Yeah,
Look at it. That original, to come up with it. And I was just very concerned about any outside criticism coming from Annapolis on this, and whether we have addressed it through this now elongated process. Let me ask about, I noticed that the funding will be put off to 2026.
27.
Is that right?
Fiscal year 27. Mm-hmm.
Right, 27. Mm-hmm. So the rationale behind that is by that time we should have what?
Thank you. And as the chair said, there was just a lot to take in here. Like, this is huge. This is the first time that Maryland had a assessment across all of its school facilities that is comparable. All of the LEAs have done different types of assessments of what their conditions are, but you could not compare one to the other. This uses very precise measurements so that they are compared, and it is not perfect. Whenever you're going and measuring 500,000 data points and getting them in, and you're going to need a lot of feedback from the LEAs and a lot of understanding about what it is that they're looking at. So I think pushing this off gives the LEAs time to, and each year we're going to be updating it. So in each year they can look and say, we don't like this, we want to challenge that, which we want them to do because we want the data correct. This gives us time to really have a product that everybody may not like the answers. In other words, their facility might be better than the others around that are competing maybe for those same dollars, but everybody will be able to understand it from a pragmatic standpoint. I'm a little bit of an optimist, but I believe that we as people, if we can understand clearly that there's a higher need and education is important to everybody, that it will be easy for people to say, I totally get it. I'd like for my school to be first, but I can see that yours needs the help more, and it go in an easier way though, and everything works out.
So I have one last question, Mr. Chairman. Bob, are we on the same page with Annapolis and with the LEAs at this point as we move forward, given what you presented this morning, which is fantastic, it seems to me, but I'm not an expert on it. Are we on the same page?
I think we're on the
out of Annapolis all the time.
Well, let me say this.
I feel confident on the commission, okay? But I also will defend the commission if I need to. I'm not afraid to do that, okay? But I want to be sure we are on the same page.
Well, I think that's our goal. You want to be in alignment. I think there's a sort of a natural stress between the legislature and us, and that, legislators are very interested in providing the best educational system in their particular jurisdictions. And we're sort of the referee in that process in terms of having to say no occasionally. And I think we're trying to develop a relationship where, you know, we're not the enemy, that we're working with people to get to a successful conclusion. We're not a bureaucrat that's just trying to delay you and cause you problems, that we're trying to really work out a solution that helps everybody. And I think that's where we're working toward getting to that point. Well, we're not the enemy, but we're a help, we're a friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can say that this is a work in progress, that we have a very good base in this assessment, and it's good data. I've gone out myself with other people, and we will continue to do that and look to see if this is making sense in the gut. Certainly, as I said, more than would welcome going out with any of the members and looking at one of these schools and looking at the data, looking at the hypothetical scores using, we had weighting in the RFP just so that we could kind of have an idea of what the MDCI could look like, and be happy to do that and go between one or two schools and look at it and see if you feel the same. But I think it is a matter of using it and testing it in the gut that will allow that comfort. I think everybody's on the same page. They want the funding to go to the highest needs effectively because it's what we have to do. Whether everybody agrees that this is currently exactly what's needed, I don't think so, but I think that we are certainly coming into a common understanding of what is needed, and those tweaks, if any are needed, will come along naturally. We have a good base to start from.
Any other comments? What about the, Bob, real quick, I don't want to go too long. The questions about temporary buildings or, you know,
relocatables
in terms of questions arose about those in terms of how they're accounted or whatever. Could you give us a quick answer on that?
Yes, I can. So in the RFP, when we did the RFP, and we tried to be as thorough and complete as possible, I think we were, but we had relocatables included as a piece of equipment. We knew that we really didn't want to consider them as permanent space. So they were a piece of equipment that had an expected life if it was a portable of 15 years, if it was a modular sitting on permanent foundation of 20 years. And we wouldn't get into the HVAC system and the roof and all that like we did on the permanent bricks and mortar because we weren't wanting to use the data to try to improve that existing facility. Once it ran out, its life ran out, it would be depleted, yet it would still be on the site. There was a concern that was not strong enough, that relocatables, even if they were being used at all, should not be considered in available square footage to deliver education, even though they were put there for that purpose originally. So lots of discussion back and forth. In one of the models that we have built, that we, as our understanding, this is what the work group were kind of settling on, but there really was nothing settled. I need to make clear on that we would treat them as a piece of equipment, but as soon as they reached the end of their effective life, they simply disappeared from square footage as if they were never there. And that did help those schools that had a lot of relocatables have a higher relative need than not using that methodology.
Any other comments somebody wants to make about the assessment work group? Any other business anybody wants to bring up? Secretary McCord, you're on mute.
I received some information, Mr. Chair, from my staff about communication we received late yesterday from Anne Arundel County. I'd like to ask that item 1D be brought back and let my staff, Michael Baer, explain that to us. Michael, if you're on, if you don't mind.
Michael?
Yes, and I apologize for the confusion. We have actually been working very closely with Anne Arundel County Public Schools and Anne Arundel County Office of Zoning and Planning to update the priority funding status of the West County Elementary School site, which has been through Clearinghouse. So We did have a meeting with them last Friday and got some updated information yesterday after the agenda came out. So I just wanted to present that information to the IAC, and if you would like to move forward with that site approval item today. So this project itself.
Mr. Chair, could I suggest that you probably want to, since everybody agreed to take it off the agenda till next month, you might want to bring it back first before Michael presents.
Yeah.
All right, that would be my request at this point.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is a pending Build to Learn project, which is why we're working very closely with them on this one. So the project itself is an elementary school that's proposed in rural Odenton along Conway Road. It's an 81,000 square foot facility to serve 500 students in pre-K through 5th grade. And as I mentioned, it's part of the Build to Learn queue right now. It was not previously in the priority funding area, so there were several actions that the Office of Planning is working on in coordination with the County Council and with the LEA to do that, and that is in process right now. We have been meeting with them here at MDP to look at the PFA issue, and they are moving forward with also an amendment to their master plan for water and sewer that is going to be going. It's been presented to the Maryland Department of the Environment earlier this month, and actually may have actually been yesterday, in fact. And their Planning Advisory Board is scheduled to review that amendment on January 26th. County Council is introducing that amendment next month, and adoption is expected in March. Upon the adoption of that, the county will submit its adopted plan to MDE for approval, and then they will also then request that we here at MDP review the inclusion of the site within their priority funding area. So just wanted to let everybody know that while it is not currently in the PFA, it's designated as a PFA common area, that we've been working closely to get that resolved so that it is eligible for funding through the Build to Learn Act funding stream.
So, Mr. Secretary, what do you want to do here?
I just make the motion to approve item 1D on the consent agenda at this point.
Oh, okay. Do I hear a motion?
Do you want me to
So that would be
the motion?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael. Okay.
Sure. We did add some language to this based on the information we got. So the motion is to approve the acquisition and use by the Anne Arundel County Board of Education of 37.5 acres of land at 2694 to 2734 Conway Road in Odenton from the Anne Arundel County government for the construction of a new West County elementary school to serve the Odenton area with a scheduled completion in fall 2024, contingent upon the Anne Arundel County Council amending the county's water sewer master plan to include the property as planned and amending its priority funding area to include the site, adhering to the actions identified in the State Clearinghouse Review, State Identifier 2021-0826-0699.
I will
Do I
make
hear a
that
mo-
motion. I'll
Second?
I move for that.
Mr. Lombardo. Any more discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, colleagues. Appreciate it.
The only thing I wanted to say in parting is Superintendent Chaudhry and I were talking, and as you all probably know, on every bill that comes up in the legislature, there are typically fiscal notes to talk about how that bill would impact various people. And on bills that affect education, we are passing on all our fiscal notes to MSDE, and Bob will bring up to us any fiscal notes and any issues that he feels are significant to the IAC whenever those bills may arise. So with that, I hear the motion, we adjourn.
Mr. Chair, before you adjourn, we also, each month, we will bring an accounting that will give you access, if you want to look at any time you want, of all of the bills that we are reviewing, so that the members can be kept up to date. And of course, we will pass anything that we're looking at and everything over to Superintendent Chaudhry's staff, and we've already confirmed that with him.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Hear a motion, we adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay. See you all next month.
Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
Thank you.